Join me as you and I and you take a journey to become better writers together and geek out.
Howdy ho, neighbors. It's Friday the 13th, and here we are at the Written Writ for our Friday the 13th special, where I like this day because I'm usually lucky on this day. And people, you make your own luck. All right, here we are. Friday special. It's about to get kicked off. Let's tell you a little bit about what's going on. Of course, we have Phil Russell's The Dynamics, which started Wednesday. Started Wednesday,
yeah.
Yeah, feels like yesterday. All the days are beginning to like meld into each other.
Yeah.
I think that's the problem with January. There you have it, folks. The Dynamics. It is at 1,058. They're trying to reach a goal of 1,523 backers. 27 days to go, so there's plenty of time to get them to where they're going and get them over where they're going, because you know what we say here on the Written Writ? We say that it's better to overfund somebody, because then what they're going to do is probably stick the money back into the book. You know, nobody makes money on Kickstarter unless you're one of those super big guys out there who are making the millions of dollars, but that's a whole other thing. Just remember, folks, you got to support each other. We raise each other up. Get over to the Dynamics. It's a fantastic little book. It has the feel of an 80s superhero comic book. And, I feel like that's one of the things that's missing in the industry today is this nice, fun superhero comic book that doesn't take itself too seriously, but at the same time is very well written. And just to show you a little bit, let's play the, if it allows me to, let's find out. Like I said, folks, a fun 80s style superhero comic book. As you can see, it's so much fun. Believe me, I got a preview of this. You guys need to check this out. It is really fun, really superhero-y, really 80s feel. I can't say enough good things about this book. Go check it out. Go support it, actually. All right, let's see. Who else do we have on? Of course, our pal Bitsy Tandem has been doing her thing again. And first of all, she wants us to get into some garbage. Because these are just really cute garbage pins. It's okay to be trash, man. And as you can see, she does a great job of making these little trash pins. And the nice hoodie sweater. This is just something for you pin collectors out there. This is just right up your alley. And who doesn't want a nice fire, a bin fire, a trash fire? Because every year so far it's been the same thing, so you might as well wear it proudly.
Yep.
And of course, Bitsy also has her other. Oh, that's right. I didn't put it up yet. Her other Kickstarter, which is the calendar with her amazing art. It's under her company name.
Sakai.
Exactly. So go check it out. I'll find it as we're talking today, and I'll probably put it up at the end of the show. But for now, we are here talking to our pal, our friend, our writing compatriot. Go ahead. introduce yourself and tell them who you are. Tell them what you do, because I always find that people, when they introduce themselves, they do a good job.
You would hope that we do.
I hope so.
Evening, folks. My name is J.L. Johnson. I'm the writer and creator of Ennead, The Rule of Nine. Ennead is an epic fantasy saga that is set to span across mediums. We started with comics. I have a world history book in the making. I'm currently writing my first novel, and I'm currently live on Kickstarter, where you can catch up on volume 1, which is halfway to its goal, a little over halfway to its goal now. This would be my 6th fulfilled or completed Kickstarter, successful Kickstarter, if we make it to that $4,000 mark. So definitely you can rely on me to fulfill. You can expect your rewards in a timely manner. And what you're looking at here for new folks is an opportunity to dive right in. You get the full volume 1, which is 188 pages, full color comic. You can also grab some 3D collectibles, 3D printed collectibles. That weapon that you see there is the Erosa, that man that is currently blocked by that wonderful play tab that Kickstarter can't get rid of, is Anatu Kinnisk, and he is the protagonist. And this campaign in particular focuses around his story. So I'm releasing a special edition comic, spot foil cover, that is 92 pages that focuses on his journey and his journey alone during volume 1, where you really get the full scope of what this mystery man is up to in the Republic Kingdom of Athea.
Dude, man, like when I went looking for the Kickstarter earlier, it was like Kickstarters. I'm like, whoa, I didn't know he had this one many up here.
Yeah, I've done a few.
You're like a veteran. I was like, okay.
Yeah, this is number 6. This story has been floating around in my head for a long time, and I forget who put me on to what this whole platform was about. But when they did, I immediately connected the dots and knew I had to go all in. So I spent about a year's time watching, learning, speaking to folks who were launching Kickstarters, and then toward the end of 2020, I hit launch for my first, and been 5 for 5, hoping for 6 for 6.
Right. I gotta say though, like as I've been diving into your world and looking at things and reading certain things, dude, this does not look like something that just happened. If you get what if you understand what I'm saying, this does not at all. This feels like the more I dive into it, the more I'm like, I'm in the middle of this, and I still I feel like there's more.
You're onto something. So when I bring up 2020, that's when Ennead was introduced to the world. I started writing comic scripts back in 2015. In a past life, I was a public school teacher, and when I stepped away from that job, I spent a couple of months really just trying to find what my new direction was going to be. And one of the things that just came to me, honestly, my now wife and I, girlfriend at the time, went on a trip to just outside of Woodstock, New York, Socrates, New York, and we were staying in an Airbnb. This little old lady had a 1-bedroom like shack in her backyard, and it was like it was like in the middle of a Zen garden. And I pulled out my laptop one day, and one thing led to another, and I was downloading Scrivener and scripting a comic. And you plant that flag there. I had always been a fan of fantasy, so as fans of the fantasy genre, we're always telling stories to ourselves. We're always escaping to other worlds. But I also had just a knack for D&D style world building, just for fun. Like, it was something that I did. I would draw maps. I would create cultures. I was a philosophy and religion major in undergrad, so I'm always out in left field. And one thing led to another. This world that was originally called Design 2 in my notes, eventually grew and grew and grew to earn an actual name, the name of Amashik. And that culture, that world, and its cultures kept developing and to the point where I really wanted to tell a sound story in that world. And that's kind of the loose through line from my first scripted comic, which no artist wanted to touch. It was so terrible. And I don't blame them. When I go back and look, it didn't look anything like it should have. And you start there, you go to the map making, the world building, the culture creation, and it was born. So that feel that you described is really, it's kind of how I came to the world. I found myself in it, and I was like, oh, well, what's over here, and who lives on that side of the world, and oh, these two cultures, they clash. Well, why are they clashing? What's their shared history? What is their story? And notes turned into panels, and panels turned into scripts, and scripts turned into this thing on your screen.
I have to admit, like, usually when you step into a world, I find that most people can't give you that sense of how big the world is, of what you're stepping into. Most of the times you step in and you're like, oh, okay. And then, stuff gets revealed and you're like, oh, this place is bigger. I feel like with yours, what you're writing here, what you're working on, you jump in and you're like, oh, this place is big. There's stuff going on. There's history here. And it's funny because, like I said, you don't usually feel that as soon as you start reading or as soon as you jump into a world.
There's a few pieces of really sound writing advice that I've picked up along the way, but I think that's chalked up to two things. And the first and most important is literally this began as a world building project. So it really is just, on one level, it is just that big. Before there was an Anatu, fun fact, Anatu didn't exist until probably the second or third round of drafts. So volume 1 existed. I was passing it out and bribing all my friends to read it.
I know the feeling.
and the folks who are kind enough to read it and get back to me on it, hey, we love it, but it just feels scattershot. Like, I don't know why you're telling me all this. It's either tell me this story or tell me this story, but don't tell me all of them. And so that kind of lent itself to how the world was actually built. It was just a disparate pile of notes that just kept getting bigger. And, King Julius happened to be in the Republic Kingdom, and Lady Elswine happened to be in the Kingdom of Edhel, and Emperor Omizako happened to be in the Dabashi Empire. Like, there were all these just cultures and people, but they were in their own little column. So Anatu and a few other characters, Gideon and Lannis, are two of my other characters that kind of fill the role that Anatu fills, which is kind of the adhesive. They bring everybody together for one reason or another, or at least they bring the reader's gaze to a particular space and place that allows you to feel grounded in the story. So that's one reason why it feels that way. It just really it was a slow burn, in terms of how I developed this. But then on the flip side, Brandon Sanderson, who, if you don't know who Brandon Sanderson is and you like fantasy, I'm sorry, I don't know why your friends don't love you, but you should read Brandon Sanderson. He also does lectures. He's been teaching at BYU forever, and you can go back years and just watch his course. And so I did that. I watched a handful of his semester worth of lessons, and one of the things he talks about often is the tip of the iceberg rule. And it's the idea that you might have this grandiose idea, or at least that's what it looks like in your story, but realistically, you have to have a healthy balance of actual icebergs underneath and just kind of these iceberg tips. And so one of the things that the size of the note pile did, or pile of notes did for me, was it allowed me to mix in certain things that really were that deep with things that just felt like they were deep. And that's one of the things that allowed me, I think, to write as quickly as I did and get as far into the world as I did, because there was a lot of meat on the bone, so to speak. But when I threw in some scraps, you couldn't tell. So, for example, when you read issue 1, you're kind of thrown into the conflict between the Republic Kingdom of Athea and the Dabashi Empire. You don't know that. You just see a guy basically riding down some other guys, lecturing his sons on legacy as he murders a bunch of people. And you're like, whoa, what is this? That actually is that deep. That story, that war, that is that deep. But then you turn the page and you go to this guy, Anatu. And he looks a little different than everybody else in the docks. He's the only asshole carrying a weapon. Nobody else is armed. And you're like, whoa.
Guys like that.
And so you're looking at him, and you're like, whoa, where's he from? What's his story? And at the time, he didn't have a story because he's the youngest character in the world. By now, I have developed his backstory, and I know a little bit more about him. But remember, as I shared that fun fact, he didn't exist until 3 or 4 drafts. So I basically grabbed him, took in my mind's eye all of my favorite fantasy characters and said, well, how can I try to make them a little bit of me and all these other guys that I grew up loving, and let's see if it works. And I think it worked. A lot of people really resonate with Anatu, and I think that's because in some ways he is that standard avatar that we love to see. He's Geralt, he's Strider, he's Jon Snow, he's all of he's all of these people. He's and in some ways he is your favorite main character in a western. He's just a badass. He's just a generic fantasy badass on the surface.
hero.
Exactly. And so when I wrote him, that's really what I was doing. I was like, can I squeeze a hero into this space that everyone says something is missing? Because that's what the feedback felt like. You're telling us these little vignettes, but we need someone to care about, which is basically saying we need a hero.
Right.
So I gave folks a hero, and then I realized, well, I can't have this flat character, and so I went back and developed him. So I think that's how I pulled that off early on. Parts of it were that deep, and then others I just tried to make really cool.
I think one of the things I like, and I as you're talking, I can actually feel it. I think one of the things you're feeling is that you've just been dumped into this world, and you're beginning to see a story happen, and you're like there as it happens, as it's being pulled together, as the circumstances are making this story happen. And that's one of those rare things that you don't get from a lot of books, because it's almost like you're seeing inside the writer's process.
And I appreciate that. That's a high bit of praise kind of tucked in there, because that is something that I enjoy a lot when I read fantasy. I think fantasy is a really, you were talking about the 80s comic, the dynamics that doesn't take itself too seriously, but is a really fun and well-told story, right? And I think there's a lot of room for that in any genre. I think as far as mainstream folks are concerned, there's a little bit too much of that in fantasy. I like fantasy that takes itself seriously. I like fantasy that gives me the opportunity to take it seriously. I have nothing, one of the things that I think about a lot is the comic Birthright. Have you read Birthright?
Yeah.
So I love Birthright. It's a fun story. I think it waits a little too long to take itself seriously. I wish it were a little meatier, but it is just a badass action comic with a sword and some magic, and that's cool. But I like the over the top, self-aggrandizement that comes with some fantasy works. And I'm not shy about that. So when I sat down and really kind of sunk my teeth into what I was doing and got so deep into it that I realized, if you stop at this point, that's silly. So you have to keep going. I tried to push further and further into that without making an ass of myself, right? So again, and that's where I kind of balance the really meaty parts that I hint at, and this is one of the beautiful pieces of working with really talented artists. You can give the artist the meat and potatoes and the rich history. So another thing in issue 1, Anatu walks through the city of Dunport, and the last 5 pages of issue 1 they're silent, right? And so that's one of the things that I get a lot of people either love or they hate about issue 1, and a fair amount of people who I got feedback from who didn't return to read more of Ennead, they didn't like that because they felt that was me taking myself too seriously. But I wanted you to walk through my world. The city of Dunport is very rich. Its history is very rich. One of the things that Anatu does, he walks over a dry moat to get out of the city of Dunport. That dry moat is now dry for a very important reason. And I've shared this on my Substack, so I'll share it here. When the Republic Kingdom took over, they led a war of secession against the Dabashi Empire and claimed this region of the empire for themselves. And when they did that, one of the last strongholds of the empire was the city of Dunport. It's one of the most glamorous port cities on the sheet. and it's also therefore one of the most fortified. It had cliffs to protect it from outside invaders, so it had the ability and the necessity to build a wall from the inside, right?
Right.
So the wall that you see Anatu walk through, the moat that's now dry, is actually it's fed from a river. There's the Cunningham Estates, and Natu visits the Cunningham Estates. And the Cunninghams, who are now one of the wealthiest families in the Republic Kingdom of Athea, switch sides at an advantageous moment to the rebels, and actually snuck the rebels into the city of Dunport through that moat. So that's dry for a very important historical reason. So I walk you through this. I mentioned none of this in the comic, but in my head, I'm like, yeah, this is fucking awesome. Sorry, I told you I was gonna beat you to it. And that's how I try to do that. I know that there's this depth, and Luke, who illustrated those scenes, he knew that there was this depth, so he went all in and trying to make this a really larger than life close to the first issue. But it was silent, so I said none of it. And that was how I try to do both.
Right. It's funny that you say that, because one of my favorite issues of a G.I. Joe is the whole issue is silent. You from beginning to end, it's just a silent issue, and as you're saying, it's very jarring. It's very it's amazing how you can still get the story with just the art aspect of things. Even you can feel the writer's hand, but at the same time, there's no word bubbles. There's nothing there except what you're looking at, and it really leaves an impression. And that issue of G.I. Joe is always stuck in my head because of that. And that's why I'm surprised that the people actually, didn't look at those 5 pages as, something else.
I think and again, some of these people, I was lucky enough, and this is one of the great things about Kickstarter, you can have dialogue with the people who read your stuff. So
exactly,
you see, hey, you didn't come back. Well, why not? Oh, well, I didn't think there was enough of a cliffhanger. I didn't feel pulled in to the next issue. So I took what I had, and I was content with it. I wasn't upset that I backed it, but I didn't feel like I needed more. And I didn't argue with that. I respect that take. One of the things that I would say in response to the folks who did have that feedback is that it is partly what you're pointing out. This is a big world. I'm trying to be patient with how I tell this story. And I actually do think it is a really powerful cliffhanger to end on that question. Who is this individual who kind of swoops into this space? Obviously is very justice oriented. He's stepping in, breaking up bar fights for no reason. And then, kind of silently making his way out of town to not make too big of an impression. Who is he? That was the question. That was supposed to be the question. In this story that is titled Ennead, the Rule of Nine, you get the Rule of Nine, you get the king and the queen, the folks who are the head of the Ennead. You get all of that, and that I kind of go on the nose with that. There's this big military conflict involving the Ennead and centered around the Rule of Nine. So who is he, and why is he here, and what is his story going to be? So for me, that was, I thought, a very powerful cliffhanger. To while I'm giving you the title aspect of the story and letting you know, like, this is really, I described it recently. That's the wall, and Anatu is the adhesive that things stick to this wall with, and so he will eventually, the answer to who he is will eventually really sit in the center of this conflict. But for now, it was just a wide open mystery. So I wanted to leave it that way.
It's so funny though, because one of my favorite heroes is the Man with No Name from the spaghetti westerns.
Yep.
And technically speaking, it's what they do with him. He's really silent. He comes in, he does his thing, and then he leaves you wondering, who is this guy? Why does he do what he does? And it's funny to me because the way things are now is everything needs to have reason and this and that. But it used to be that you could bring in a character like that. You can bring a character like Wolverine in, another good example. You don't need to tell their story. You can just, this is this mysterious guy who's doing these things, and then you can allude to the fact of maybe this is what his backstory is, but I feel like now everybody wants to know everything.
and the Man with No Name is a great another great reference because that character is one of my favorite characters. You know, I feel like most people have like that uncle or that grandfather or that cousin or who introduced them to a Western for the first
Yeah.
time.
Mhm.
And so, you know, I remember sitting down on, you know, my grandfather's lap. He was a big fan of Westerns. And I remember the stories of my mom telling me how he would always just command the TV, and that was the only thing that came on the TV. So I remember doing some of these early drafts with Anatu and going back and watching Fistful of Dollars and just trying to get the beats. One of my biggest regrets, I have a small handful of regrets with how I've introduced Ennead to the world. And if I could go back, I would not have told you Anatu's name. I really regret that. That's one of the things that I regret. I wouldn't have told you. Literally, no one knows him. And I could have really leaned into that. But I think part of me really just didn't think highly enough of the story to really try to capitalize on that at the time. That's how I feel about it right now, because I look at it now and I feel like had I kept his name out of this story, I think his story would be that much more powerful right now, where we leave him at the end of volume 1. But again, I think a lot of people still resonate with the character. I'm not mad about it. But if it is one of the few regrets that I have about how I went about telling the story.
You can feel the power of the character. You can feel the intensity of the character. So I can't say that you messed up. So
Well, I
at the
appreciate
same
that.
time, I can understand why you would want to do that, because it's such a powerful thing. You know, the mystery of these characters, of these heroes, because that's what they are. They're hero archetypes. You know, they're perfect, not perfect. They do what they do, but at the same time, you're like, are they completely good? You know, and it's done in a way where it leaves it up in the air, and like today is like it kind of slaps you in the face, and I feel like that's one of the reasons probably why you went in that direction, is because, you know, as we read stuff, as we ingest stuff, we're like, well, this is how I should do it, because, you know, this is what people are liking right now. You know, at the same time, you know, it's the first ththing that pops into our head as writers that we do. Sometimes it changes. That's what drafts do. But you know,
You know, I really enjoy one of the things that I actively try to inject into the Rule of Nine is this idea that everybody's the hero of their own story. And I really wanted to lean into that, no matter how uncomfortable it will eventually make some of these stories for myself to write and readers to read. I really want, especially for someone who I'm giving you their viewpoint, I want you to know that they think they're the hero. They think they're justified. And, you know, for example, the conflict between the Dabashi Empire and the Republic Kingdom, you have a group of rebels. Rebels always think they're justified. I mean, we don't need to really go into that.
that's
And
true.
and empires always think they're justified. They think that it's their order, it's their structure that makes the world run the way it runs. And to an extent, they're right. And to an extent, the rebels are right that control is oppressive and it doesn't allow people to live the life the way they want to live it. So you know, that's a story that everyone's familiar with, and I think it immediately, you know, moves something in us. So people are going to immediately pick a side, and
Right.
and once you do that, I've got you, because the second you pick a side, the second you pick a character, you know, and not for you know, the sake of being subversive, right? I think that can be dangerous, but just now me naturally telling you the story that I had planned for this individual, um, you know, you're either going to be satisfied or disappointed, but you're gonna feel something. If you thought you were following a hero who turns out to be more like a villain, you know, you have to wrestle with that. Well, what about that individual made you feel like they were heroic, and what about that individual, you know, do you now condemn, and can
Right.
you reconcile those things? I think that's what we're always doing.
But
So that's definitely in there.
I was going to say, it's funny though, because as writers, we already know that, you know, no villain is a villain and no hero is a hero, because, you know, the villain always thinks they're the hero, or usually they do. You do have villains who are bad just for the sake of being bad, or because that's what they like to do. But it is very rare that the villain is somebody who sees themselves as a villain. It's usually somebody who goes, I'm doing this for this reason, and this is how I'm going to save the world. Those are usually the villains. And even in society today, those are the villains we deal with.
You know, I don't want to name names in my story, but there's someone in my story who I am very excited to tell their tale because they are probably the person with the clearest convictions that I am giving you a viewpoint of. And because of that, they're willing to do things that other people may not be willing to do. And I think that's what it comes down to. A lot of times villains just have clearer convictions about what they want and the type of world they want to see. And they are not caught up with how you feel about it. You talk about the type of villains that we see in the real world. Again, won't name any names, but if you look out across any particular landscape, the people who are often pointed at as the villains, well, they're just very clear about what they want.
Yeah.
And because that is the case, they tend to have a very, strong following, and some people use the word cultish following. But that's because those are individuals who also share that very particular and often small worldview, right?
Yeah.
Or really large worldview, depending on what type of villain we're talking about, right?
Right.
So, I think the folks who we often define as heroes, they also have similar convictions, but they're gonna just be, it's the Superman's only gonna destroy so many buildings, right? He's gonna destroy a few because he's Superman, but he's gonna stop eventually. Peter Parker.
I can't do this. People are suffering.
Yeah, right. Peter Parker is not nearly as strong as Superman, but he's gonna also break some things along the way and get in trouble and piss off the police. But he's only gonna go so far, right? Like I think, and so, but again, both of those characters have a righteousness about them. They see the world in a particular way, and again, I just think it's what side of the coin are you on, and that's some of the most fun stuff that I'm writing right now, because I am a little bit further ahead with my script writing than the book is out in the world, and so
That's
putting those pieces together, I'm currently still 6 ahead, so that's good. It's a good number. One good thing about the slow pace of indie comics is that if you're on your game, you can stay in front of it.
That's true.
And so I'm happy about that. But there are some reveals, some things that we learn in volume 2 that I hope will take some of my longtime readers and just do one of those.
It's funny that you mentioned both Spider-Man and Superman, because they're a certain type of hero, and you're right. Usually, what'll happen when they're doing stuff, when they're fighting, is they'll make that realization of, oh, I can't keep doing this here. People are going to get hurt. Property is going to be destroyed. And I think that's what makes those heroes the way they are, because they'll realize this, and then they'll take the villain somewhere where they can cause less damage. And I feel like these heroes don't exist too much anymore, because I find fewer heroes doing that, where they go, wait a minute, if we fight here, we're going to cause too much death and mayhem. Let's go somewhere else. Now it's like, you wonder if these heroes care about anybody else but themselves.
Unfortunately, I think a lot of that is chalked up to Hollywood liking to blow things up and it looking really cool on big movie screens. So, you run with that. And then I think it gets put into the zeitgeist that you need property destruction to make a really cool, splash, for lack of a better word, and maybe not, maybe that's the right word. And now you see, one of the things, just this a quick pivot, a lot of stuff that I see on Twitter and on YouTube is, here's my ranking list of this set of Marvel movies, and I can't keep up. I haven't been able to keep up in 6 years. There's too many. And I can't even, I'm not commenting on the quality of any of these, because the last Marvel movie I saw was the second Thanos one. I can't even remember the name at this point. I always just call it the second Thanos one, even though it's technically like the third Thanos one, because I know he's in some Avengers movie, but like that one, when Thanos loses, like that was the last one I saw.
There you go. That's the best way to describe it. When Thanos loses.
and sorry if you didn't see that, I guess. I don't know. Spoiler. But like that's the last one I saw. And on the flip, on the DC side, maybe it was Aquaman. Birds of Prey, like, I don't know, something that I caught on HBO one night. And again, It's not because I'm actively against these movies, but the formula is such that when I sit down, I know what I'm going to get. And because these characters are so rich, right? You grew up with these characters.
Exactly.
You're either going to give me that character, or you're going to subvert my expectations of that character. You can't do anything else. And so
That's
again,
exactly
not
what
about
happens.
not a knock on the quality of the movies, but it's just not an experience that I'm all that jazzed up about. And again, I think it has to do with the fact that right now there's this formula for a really cool Hollywood blockbuster that is just taking over
Yeah.
everything. And again, some of these things are enjoyable when I sit down and watch them. I'm really happy that I did, but I don't go seek them out for that reason.
I have to admit, like, that there's because people always ask me my opinions on the superhero movies, and I'm like, well, I'll watch them, I'll sit there, I enjoy them, I'll enjoy them for what they are, and I'll sit there and go, well, that wasn't really this, because that's not the way the character is. And they're like, oh, you're gatekeeping. I'm like, I'm not gatekeeping. You can like whatever you want to like. I'm just telling you that's not the character. This is this variation of this character. That's not the character the way he was presented to me all long ago, and the incarnations that followed him.
And that's what's so difficult when you play on waters like that. I think we all, no matter if you want to or not, you sit down and you have your expectations, and that's a really hard thing to come away feeling really good about. And again, in a case of a new story or a story that you're not familiar with, you don't know when your expectations are going to be subverted because
Yep.
it's brand new to you. One of the things that I thought in Game of Thrones really did for television was bring that back, or maybe introduce it for the first time where, first I don't know, the Game of Thrones or the Walking Dead do it first. Both of them are behind me here. They
both did it, so
they both did it. So like, who
Yeah.
did it first on television, right? They kind of did it at the same time, but like that was another turn in terms of what the formula was. Let's just start subverting everything. And again, I think that gets stale. And when I'm writing, I'm trying not. Again, I intentionally made it so everybody thinks they're the hero in their story. But other than that, I didn't really try to intentionally infuse any big messaging or any big themes into the characters in the early drafts. And I think I've benefited from that because I can sit back and I can read a speech that Queen Ilaria gives, and I know where my head went when I wrote that speech. I know what particular, philosophical themes I was playing with, but I didn't say Queen Ilaria needs to be, a nihilist or Queen Ilaria needs to be egalitarian. This is Queen Ilaria. She's this third generation monarch who was handed power. And she's now on the cusp of a new or an old war rising again. She feels like she's facing threats from within. How would she react? And I just tried to do that. How would that person react? Not how would I, make this person larger than life in this moment. Just how would she react?
Right.
And then when I sat back and I looked at it, I realized what I was doing and where I went, but I didn't intend that. And that's been also really fun. These characters are changing, and I'm trying my best to allow them to change with every iteration of them. And as the story goes further, I see that as a new iteration of the character. Like where Anatu is in my script writing is
Right.
quite different than where he was at the end of issue 1. He's experienced some things, he's remembered some things, and he's always remembered them, right? But they've now kind of been brought back to the forefront because some of the things he's seen specifically and experienced here in Athea, and so he's gonna start pivoting. He's gonna start being less of a mystery and showing you more of his true self and what he's actually capable of. And again, that wasn't exactly planned because he kind of came out of nowhere. But yeah, I think the ability to do that with IP that's your own and characters that are fresh and new is something that unfortunately a lot of these screenwriters don't have the opportunity to do when they sit down for these big multi-million-dollar movies, and I think it unfortunately impacts folks who want to get into writing,
Right.
thinking they have to do that too.
That's so funny you're saying this because I feel like that is part of it. I feel like the other part of it is starting with a message that they want to say instead of starting with the story that leads into a message, like you're saying. Because I feel like today everything has a message, and the message is the important thing about it. And I'm like, no, you tell the story, and the story will tell you the message because it's in the story. It's part of the story. When you do the whole message before the story, you feel it. You feel the okay. I feel like I'm being talked to.
And what are just to go with Game of Thrones, since it's something that is fantasy and it's larger than life,
Yeah.
but it also is a novel series first and foremost. I think that's one of the reasons why people found themselves getting so upset in the later seasons. And I'm not talking about what people would call poor writing or not. Again, I don't like ragging on screenwriters or writers, especially now that I'm actually doing the thing. I didn't like it in the first place, but I was let down a little bit by the end of Game of Thrones. I will say that. But again, not even talking about quality of writing, but I think things like what ended up happening with Sansa's character, right? Like, I think that in particular her relationship with Ramsay Bolton, right? Like, I think that one of the things that obviously upset people was the triggering material that they decided to cover. But I think the only reason why that actually in this fictional world really jars people, again, beyond those who are directly triggered by the material, is that they thought they were watching something else. And the reason why they thought they were watching something else is sometimes I think that people go looking for a message instead of trying to follow a story. And so when you look for the message of Sansa Stark early on, you see the young girl who, has her hopes dashed about Prince Charming, and then is rising up to be, this queen, this resilient figure, and then all of a sudden that snatched from. But that's not. I mean, yeah, that's the story of Sansa Stark, kinda, but not really. I mean, it could be. It's one interpretation of the story of Sansa. I think Sansa is, a tragic character in some ways that might not ever have that moment. And if you're actually, we don't know if she's going to have that moment. But I think because of how people see the young female archetype in stories, they wanted that for her.
Right.
And again, I know that the material was troubling. I know that the scene is difficult. It's very difficult in the books as well. Even though it's not Sansa in the books, it's very difficult material.
Yeah.
But again, I heard less people grappling with that and more people grappling with, well, Sansa wouldn't stand for that. Why would they make Sansa do that? That's not Sansa's character. But quite frankly, we like, yeah, if you're telling me that it's supposed to be Jane Poole, cool, but you don't even know who Jane Poole is. So what are you talking about? Right? Like, what do you mean it's not Sansa? What were you expecting? What did you want? And so again, I try to stay away from that. I try to stay away from all the infighting on the internet, and I don't do any of the back and forth, because I don't think it's healthy or smart as a writer to do, especially one who's trying to be completely independent. You get pigeonholed real fast doing that. But also, it's just, this art is supposed to be subjective. Like, I want you to be able to come to Ennead and take something from it. Like, I want you to be able to come to Ennead and be forced to feel something. I don't want to shove a message down your throat, because why would you stay? Because the only reason you would stay is if that message is for you. But now I've just taken my potential readership and I've done this to it. And in effect, I could have talked to those people for a much lower dollar amount with much less time.
That is true.
Just tweeting out whatever little political or socio-cultural message I wanted to tweet out. But that's not what I wanted to do. I wanted to tell the story. And so I think it's so hard to plant a flag on what's what in the space that we're occupying. Yeah, it's just tough. Like, what are we actually doing when we're critiquing a show like Game of Thrones and calling the writing poor? What are we doing? Again, maybe it is poor, but what are we actually doing? Are we actually just saying that we were disappointed and let down by the finish? That's one thing, but why do you need to have an hour and a half? First of all, who are you? Second of all, why do you have an hour and a half YouTube video talking about how bad the writing is? Where's your IMDb page? What did you do? And I just feel like it's like this weird thing that we do now, instead of actually engaging with material and having intelligent conversations. We're just gonna rip everything to shreds without ever really having been in the arena, so to speak. So I could get down that rabbit hole really quick, so I'm gonna pull myself back now. But
I completely agree with you. I feel you're completely right. I don't think people review anymore. I think people tear down. If my issue with Game of Thrones was that their hero's journey was cut short.
1000%.
You didn't feel the journey, so that's why the character's ajar. Because you didn't see the journey for them to get to where they were going to go.
That's beautifully put.
Exactly. And that's what the issue is. But everybody just goes, if you didn't like it, you didn't like it. Just say you didn't like it. You don't have, because you know what it is. They want to be smart. They want to go, well, there's a reason why I didn't like it. I'm like, no, you just didn't like it.
No,
I can tell you that for me, that's what it is. But that's, as a writer, I'm looking for the hero's journey. Because the hero's journey goes two ways. Either you become the hero, or you become the villain.
And that is, and what they did is they took out, it's like we got to, for all of the characters, we got to the same point, and then we had a chunk removed, and then we were just told, hey, hero, villain, hero, villain, hero, villain.
Exactly. We're going to tell you now who they are.
and because you say that, and I think of Bran, I think of John, I think of Danny, I think of all the characters. That's exactly what happened. You were just told.
And what makes it worse is that the style of storytelling they were doing, and here's what the other issue is: the style of storytelling they were doing was not that style at the end. They were leading you somewhere. They were showing you why these people are the way they are. They were giving you a trip. They were giving you the journey. And then they decided, well, now we're going to tell you what we want to tell you.
Yes, sorry, the journey's over, folks. We're going to cut it over. And again,
that's a Star Wars deal.
That's why I think it's hard to just criticize the writing, because criticizing the writing on the internet is one thing. Yeah. What you're actually doing is you're criticizing a room full of people who had varying power structures and a lot of variables floating. And so was it actually that they couldn't land the plane, so to speak, from a writing perspective, or was it other things? Like, did the people who were manning that ship, did they all of a sudden just forget what they did the first 6 seasons or so? Probably not. They probably were doing something else. And so I recently was lucky enough to catch Neil Gaiman and George R.R. Martin in New York at a little fireside chat they had, and listening to the two of them speak, both of them prolific writers in their own ways. I think I'd get in trouble for calling George prolific right now, but but both prolific writers, but both of them as individuals, they were so calm, so well-tempered, and so pleasant to listen, talk about their arc of their careers. And so when you think about that hero's journey, I just think about the two of them. It's like they wouldn't be who they were if you took out a big chunk and told me they were just world famous writers. Like, exactly. they had to go to the signings where one person showed up. They had to go and shop around their respective television deals and be let down and be steered astray and before it could get to American Gods on Showtime and Sandman on Netflix and House of the Dragon and Game of Thrones. Like you just can't do that anywhere. And part of us, I think we know that, we feel that, it's intrinsic in us that we have to pay our dues in a way. And that's I've never heard someone say it so concisely, but that really is what it is. They cut the hero's journey short for pretty much every character. Exactly. And then the few folks who they didn't cut it short, those are some of the fan favorites, I think. And those are some of the folks who got sent off very early, like a Ned Stark, right? Like, his journey does get cut short, but it's done in a way that we felt how we felt about Ned kind of universally, I think, as folks watching it or reading. Like, Ned was the hero. He was the righteous figure. Like, I don't think anyone can actually convince me that they honestly thought Ned Stark was a bad guy and deserved to have his head cut off. I don't think you can make that up. I really don't. I think you'd be hard pressed to make a legitimate straight face argument about that. And again, if you're telling me with your hindsight, because you can see what happens to him and you see the world he's playing in and you can see in the minds of other characters, well, that's not fair. Here's someone who thought that they were in a place that was just, and even though he had been wronged and his family had been very recently wronged by one power structure, he literally helped lead a war to change that. And the man that he left to change King's Landing and therefore Westeros was a man he trusted. So he
Sometimes we
goes
make
into that.
mistakes.
Yeah, he goes into that setting thinking, well, I trust Robert, and although Robert is, not the same Robert that I used to know, there's no way that
And we
he's
all do
gonna.
that. Yeah.
Yeah, we all do that, and so
I've had friends that you're like, oh, there's no way. Then they do something, you're like, what the?
yeah. So like, you feel that really deeply, and so again, I think that there's so many things that indie folks that I read and that I engage with. I think we're always stuck feeling like we've got to be the indie version of something
Yeah.
else.
Yeah.
One of the things that I didn't put on my first few Kickstarters because I didn't want to was like, if you enjoy this, then you'll like this. If you enjoy that, then you'll read Ennead and you'll like it. I didn't do it because I didn't want people coming to it that way. But then I got some just business advice on being on Kickstarter, and I decided to start doing it. But I don't want you to think of what I'm doing as Game of Thrones light, because then you're going to bring all this stuff to it that's just, quite frankly, not here.
Right.
And I don't want that to mar your experience, because that's not what I'm trying to do.
I brought Nat in, and I'm happy he's here because I was about to read all this stuff. Now he can say it himself. You put a lot of stuff here in the comment section. So Nat, go ahead. You were saying something about a certain part of the topic we were talking about before.
I can't read it on my screen, right? I can try and pull it up on.
The stuff he said has nothing to do with it.
Well, no, it was a certain thing we were talking about at a certain point, and this all totally makes sense. The blade logic says that the only that which conquers the other right, as stated in the books of sorrow and the writing of Tolan that's shattered. And this is when we were talking about the power dynamics. And I was like, this is good. I got to bring it up. So you're there now. So now you can go more in depth now that I kind of said what you were saying. So go ahead.
So the blade logic states that only that which is stronger can conquer it. Thus, Zebu Araf, being the high patron of war, is considered to be the strongest wielder of the sword logic. And since all combat is war, and war is worship to Zebu, then that's what makes her stronger. But us as being paracausal beings, we could take her worship and apply it to our own blade. But would that not aid in the worship of Zebu? So therefore, we're in a predicament where we can't really fight Zebu, but yet Zebu is waiting for us to fight her.
And see, Jordan, this actually fits with the conversation we were having. I just think it's funny that he put it there. Look, Jordan and Nat are like, no, but it does fit that whole power dynamic we were talking about before. Yeah, they're gonna keep nodding.
Well, so I think one of the, when you talk about power dynamics and conquering, and so I'll take this as an opportunity to just pivot back to Ennead for a second.
Of course.
There are certainly folks that I am giving you the viewpoint of who would 1000% agree with, obviously not the blasphemous worship that you were just referring to, but certainly
it's Destiny 2 stuff. Don't worry about it.
No, it's all good. But the first half of that says, what conquers is what's right, and I think that there are certain aspects in all of these stories, all of these tales, whether that's numbers at the box office, number of pledges and backers on Kickstarter, or number of soldiers you bring to a battlefield. On some sense, that is true, because that's human history, right? That is what has happened.
Yep.
But I shouldn't have used the word true, because I was going to pivot to use the word true in a very particular way. It's right, but it's not true, right? And I'll never forget this. So I work, I manage a gym in my daytime life. And we, my old boss and I, we built a few of our gyms together. So we put some things together, and we're both kind of perfectionists. And he would always see me in the corner measuring a line or making a cut, and just shout across the room, "Make it true, make it true." And so it doesn't need to be perfect. It just needs to be true. And so I think in some cases, that's what we're talking about. Like when we talk about might is right, and the blade kind of conquer the strongest blade kind of conquering all. It's like, just make it true. If I can win this war and if I can end this line of the story, then whatever comes after is true. I can just make it true. And so I think there's, King Julius is one of my most literal examples of that in any of the Rule of Nine. So I don't disagree. And I think that it's one of the really fun things that you can play with when you're writing, is this idea that certain characters do come to embody these ideas that, again, make some people uncomfortable. Because I think if we wanted to pivot and talk about, United States, military exploits around the world, we probably get real uncomfortable really quickly, right? Or maybe we wouldn't. I don't know. I don't know you all that well. But my point is, like, I think that you can play with that in fiction. You can talk about it in the real world, but it is something that resonates. Yeah, for sure.
Definitely. And speaking of your book and your Kickstarter, I gotta say, dude, this the box looks fantastic.
It was
the collector's box.
It was a dropped ball. So, I said I'm going to where I'm recording. I'm currently moving. So this is my empty apartment, which is like 30 minutes away from where I'm moving to. I have a studio set up at my office, but I got out of the house much later, and my office is a little bit further, and I already cut it close, as you know. So I had to make a game time decision. But I should have brought the box. But I didn't bring the box. But one of the things that I wanted to do, and excuse me, I'm glad that you pulled this up, that first little panel there, that is that empty moat that I was talking to you about. Right. So, Luke understanding the value and the importance of that bridge that he's walking over, and the fact that eventually the story of, the Athean rebellion will be told, like, that's a place that you've now been. So when you see it from a new perspective, eventually you'll be able to grab it. But I wanted to tell kind of a Natu story over volume 1 on that box. So the first panel is him entering. The second panel is him getting into some shit. Again, that's 2 for me. I'm sorry. And then the third is him recognizing that he can't be this person that he thought he could be here. And then that fourth one is him, acting on that. And so, and kind of donning his old persona when he puts on the helm for the first time. And then I don't know if it's the next thing, so I don't know if you click over to the right, you get the bottom of the box, which is kind of where that's the side. That's also him, getting ready. But then you get the bottom of the box, which is where we leave him, and where and I don't. It doesn't really tell you much, but that's where we leave Anatu at the end of volume 1. And so I won't say what he's doing, what he has done, but I wanted to capture his journey on that box. And again, I told you that one of the things I'm going to reveal is the inside of that box eventually. So I'll keep that a secret, but you get more of his story inside the box. And so that was one of the things that, again, as an indie creator, you gotta do things,
What
and
you're saying is, if you pick this tier on the Kickstarter, you'll find out before anybody what the inside of the box says. That's what you're saying, right?
I'm saying that, yes, you'll be one of the first. This is true. And you'll also get all of the very cool things that are inside it, like the spot.
Oh, dude, man, yeah, they're so
and
cool.
And then this little guy, this is one of my favorites. So this is his Eurosa. That's what I call it. There's a language. This thing will eventually. There you go.
There we go. Yeah.
There's a language that I hesitate to say I developed. There's a bunch. I guess there's a bunch of these programs, but there's a program that I came to find called Vulgar Language, and video game developers use it to develop, unique algorithmic-based languages for the games. And so I used it to develop a language, and so that language is the mother tongue of Amashik. And so there are certain cultures that still hold on to iterations of Nazola, and then there's one group of folks who speak it fluently to this day in Amashik, and those would be the Clavin. They're not. Anatu is not one of them. Those are my in-universe elves, for lack of a better descriptor, and they speak it fluently still. But the Erosa is modeled after old school man catchers. So I had this idea that I wanted to play with a medieval bounty hunter. And I wanted to have a medieval bounty hunter culture in my world. And so I developed that, and that's the Kavanians. And that's where Anatu's from. But and again, Anatu didn't exist. So I had this culture, and I wanted to figure out, how do I define the pinnacle of this medieval bounty hunter? And it came down to being able to being able to wield a Erosa. And if you made it almost like, it is your last achievement as a Raukita, which is their title in the Kavanian Navy, is to be given the honor of wielding a Erosa. And so as you get deeper and deeper into your service, you get a big enough body count, for lack of a better word, and you're now gifted this. And so it was only right, when I was telling his story, that I had those printed, because again, that's something that's a little bit of a slow burn, slow reveal, but has been shared.
But it
in
shows how
various
important
places.
it is.
Exactly. And so I wanted to do that.
I'm happy that you mentioned video games, because like I was saying, you feel the immensity of this world, and as somebody who plays massively multiplayer games and RPGs, this feels like the lore you would get before you started playing a game, or as you discover while you're playing the game, and you get revealed bits and pieces of lore. This is what this feels like. Like, you're about to get this quest where you get the special weapon, and then you get the whole. You know what I'm saying?
Absolutely. And there, I've done a fair share of that in my past life as a pretty much lifelong fan of fantasy. We all. That's one of the cool things too about being able to really geek out with folks who actually enjoy the fantasy genre.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people misunderstand what it is and what we're actually enjoying.
I agree.
But there are certain things that brought us to this table, because there was, while I think there's a lot of, fantasy stories out there, when that game comes out, right? Like I can remember the first few hours I put in on Skyrim on every single console when a new console came out, because I just needed to be in a fantasy world, and it wasn't after the fifth when I'm playing Skyrim on my Twitch, like, at my on my Switch, like I'm not like I don't really need to be playing it, but like when I'm setting it up and I've got the handles and I'm fighting in my living room and my wife is looking at me like I have three heads, I already did that, but I just want to be there. And so that's part of why I think this story has just come out this way, because it's how I've interacted with the genre for so long. And I can't even make the claim that most of it was purposeful until it hit me what was happening. And so that's definitely, that's one of those moments. I had this culture, these medieval bounty hunters, and then it just, the way that they hunt. One of the things that they do, everything is. You basically get a SEAL team, right? So you get six to 12 of these guys and girls who'll hit a location and they'll go after a target. And there's a prize for the one individual who brings that target back. And you can go about that however you like. You can go straight up skill for skill. Who gets there first wins. You can create little factions. This is something I play with in book 6. I show you a small group of Raukitas following a new target on the island of Araxig, on the other side of the blue expanse from where Natu is. But so you get this opportunity to follow and see this play out. And again, it's one of the things that allows the world to feel so much bigger than what you've seen thus far, because there's little moments like that, but we've all seen something like that. I think we've all interacted with that mission in the video game, where you're going and you think the NPC that you're with is your friend, and then they betray you at the end. Right?
I hate that.
You know what I mean? So like, how couldn't you relate to that moment? And again, I think when you do it, what I've been, again, because I was developing this world for as long as I was, I'm doing it in cultures and in places with names and ideas that feel unique. because I wasn't trying to, oh, let me recreate this scene. Oh, let me give you this moment. It was like, no, I'm playing around in this space. And like you said, I find myself here as the writer.
Yeah.
Well, where am I going to put my gaze? What might be happening? Because there are things happening in Al-Mashik and the way
Exactly.
I see it.
What are you
And
going to
so
pay attention to?
where are we going to look? You know,
Yeah.
but there's stuff going on, you know, and it's because some of these places have had years of conflict and years of development, not only in my mind, but also in universe. And so
Right.
the Kavanians are one of them. And it goes back to the power vacuum thing too. When Athea succeeds from the Dabashi Empire, the Dabashi Empire loses half of its land holdings. And so when that happens, that obviously creates a power vacuum. And,
Yeah.
and the world becomes more regional. When the big, fat landmass in the middle somehow gets smaller, folks like the Kavanians get an opportunity to expand their control of trade routes on, you know, the Blue Expanse.
Exactly.
Where, you know, they used to have to share that or really pirate that from the Empire. They don't have to do that much anymore.
Right.
And the folks that the Empire were trying to, you know, conquer in the Kingdom of Edhel, well, now they have some room to breathe. So how is their governmental system and their power structure going to change? Well, obviously, people aren't going to be less power hungry. They're going to turn that energy that was defending their borders inward, and there's going to be new conflicts that brew. And so once I started looking across my world that way, I was like, oh, I want to look at that. because that would have an impact on this. And then, oh, well, then I want to look at that too. Well, what about, so who would be there? Who would be the right character to see that? And so it's equal parts completely controlled by me, but also really, really up to the characters and up to the world.
I'm happy you said all of this for two reasons. One of the reasons first is that, you know, people always look at us writers like, what are you talking about? The characters talk to you, but they do. They have a voice of their own. They have what they want to happen to them. That, you know, and it's funny because they always look at you like you're the writer. Yes, but the character wants to do certain things, and because the character's been created in a certain way, they're going to do certain things that you probably don't want the character to do. And the second reason I am happy you brought that up is because I love what you do with your Instagram and, you know, sharing the writing with everybody. I like your little videos that you put up where you go into the writer's process, where you talk about all this stuff. You know, I feel like it's important for writers out there to see stuff like this, because it goes back to one of the reasons I started this show, was because there's a piece missing once you find out how to write and when you start writing, where you take a journey to become that writer who you're going to be. And nobody tells you about that little journey, you know, because the thing to tell you is just write. You're just supposed to write because that's what you're supposed to do. Before I let you go, before I come back to you, Matt, you were going to say something?
So it sort of feels like you have a lot of, you put a lot of work into creating this world. At what point did you just go in the creative process that you just like had that moment where you stepped back and you were like, whoa, this is how it works?
So there are admittedly a few of those, but the one that you're talking about, like the first one, let's call it within the last probably 18 months, there was a moment in time where as I was doing one of these scans from kind of east to west in Amashik, and I was just looking at the clicks, I had a moment where I basically followed a character from where I had envisioned them to, again, where they would want to go. So this particular character, without spoiling anything in my story, they have, this is a character I alluded to earlier, they have a very, very, very clear-cut reason why they want to do what they want to do. And so what they want to do runs counter to what pretty much every other major character is looking for, whether it's control of their particular country, whether it's finding a peaceful finish, whether it's protecting their liege, whatever it is. Like, what this character wants is the thing that creates the obstacle for most of them, just by, and not by their direct action. Like, they don't literally hand-to-hand fight everybody in the story, but when they make a decision, it sends a tsunami effect through the rest of the story. And so that was the first time, because it wasn't supposed to be there. It wasn't something that I put in the notes. It wasn't something that I thought was going to happen. And it literally was like a wave. And so that was the first time that happened. And I remember texting a buddy of mine, shout out to Stephen Johnson, who's the writer of the Everborn saga, who's someone, if you're not familiar with,
he's been on the show before.
Yeah, that's my guy. So when I first met Stephen, he took me under his wing, and he's the reason why I give him credit. He and my buddy Dan are the reasons why I actually had the confidence to do this. But I remember texting Stephen, I figured it out. That day, that was that moment. And it was just, again, listening to what this character wants and what this character wants. I'm doing this with my hands. It's like a T-bone car accident. Like it's not supposed to be there, and it's not. Exactly. Again, not going to directly impact everybody, but when it does happen, when they do make this move that they're going to make, that they were always going to make, I realized after studying the history of Al-Mashik that this will have to have this particular magical and this particular geopolitical impact in order for it to really mean something. And so, that was the first one. There's been a few of those since, but that was the first big, like, whoa, this is it. Which is, I appreciate it. My wife, we've been married for 4 years now, but we've been together for 13. And so I always joke, like, other than spending time with my wife, I literally don't think that there's anything that I've done more in that span of time. Like I went to school for a little bit. I went to grad school. I was a teacher. I've been a coach. I've been doing all these things, but like I've been playing. And again, it was back when it was Design 2. I've been playing in this world for a long time. So a lot of it really isn't me trying to, I'm not trying to remember these bits that I'm sharing with you. Right. I've literally read them and studied them and been a part of them for so long that like, it's like I'm telling you American history. That's how I feel. Like,
and that's what it feels like when we're hearing you talk. It feels like you're telling us, here's the history. Yeah. It doesn't sound like you're okay, so here this and here that. No, it's like, let me regale you on some history of what's been going on. Yeah.
And that's how, and that's genuinely how I feel when I'm in the space. And that's one of the reasons why I'm so, you started off and said nobody makes money on Kickstarter. I have not turned a profit, but being honest, but I've done 5 Kickstarters. They've all been successful. That's over $30,000 in crowdfunded money. Yeah, but that's what it takes to do this.
It does.
But as long as that doesn't stop, I get to keep doing this. Exactly. And and it's cool to talk about other stuff and things that other people have played in, but it's even more fun when I know that if this is the least bit intriguing, then you're at least gonna be curious about any. Like, so there's that part of it too. I can genuinely, this is fun, and then now you might go read the book too. Like, cool. All right. All I got to do is keep hitting launch on Kickstarter. Okay. I'll sign up for that.
And it's so funny. I like that you said that, because one of the things we tried to explain to people about Kickstarter is the fact that a lot of the artists, a lot of the writers, a lot of the people who are doing these Kickstarters, what they're trying to do is just continue to do what they love to do, give you these stories, put this stuff out there. They're just, and I think you said it so well, it lets you continue to do what you're doing and what you love to do, and I feel like that's the best definition of that, because we, every once in a while I sit here and I go, well, come on, folks, just support these people, because this helps them bring more books out and more of this, and people look at you like, why would you not want to make a profit and bring and continue to bring the books? I'm like, it's not that they don't want to make a profit, it's that if you do what you do, they can continue to do what they do.
And that's, my brother-in-law asked me this when I first started. He's not a writer, but a successful individual, and he was asking me about scaling. What are your plans to scale? Because I was talking to him about backer counts. My highest backed campaign is, I think, 229, which I think is fantastic.
Nice,
right? But like, he hears 229 and he's like, what are you going to do with that? And I'm going to keep telling my story. What do you mean?
Exactly.
So I don't really have plans to scale per se. I mean, I would love to scale on a Kickstarter scale, but like that's 229 to 1,000. That's not 229 to 250,000. Like, I mean, that would be excellent.
It would be beautiful.
But I would not turn it down. But that isn't necessary for what this is right now.
Exactly.
You know, if we fast forward, I imagine that the comic will be done by 2025. That's when, like, when we're in the year 2025, Ennead the Rule of 9 volumes 1 through 3 will be complete. And they're technically on pace to be done a year before that, but you never know what's going to happen. I am not drawing these things.
You give yourself some room.
Exactly. Like that is what, because again, one of these Kickstarters might fail, and then 2 might fail, and then now I'm sitting here trying to figure out how to pay for it. But when that is done, that's when I'll start thinking about things like scale. But I need to tell the story. And the story needs to be told in order for me to do any of the novel stuff that I'm talking about, the fictional history stuff, and the eventual moves that I want to make into things like board games. And hell, if someone came to me and said, "Hey, we would love to, talk to you about making this an open world video game," I think I'd pass out and then say yes. Right? That would be fantastic. Again, like there's certain, of course, I'm obviously a dreamer, right? Like I would love that, but at the bare minimum, I want the ability to tell the story in the medium and mediums that I want to tell it in. And the first one is comics. And when that comic is complete, and one of the reasons why I wanted to start with comics, I mentioned that I have started the novel. One of the reasons why I wanted to start with comics is I always felt like the marriage between epic fantasy and comics was so seamless. But again, so many of the things that you find in the fantasy comic section, to me, and again, this isn't knocking them, they're action adventure. They're the action and adventure character in a fantasy, which is great. You need that character. You need the character who can cut and kill anything that comes in front of them in order for it to be called fantasy. I get it.
Right.
But what about all the other people? What about the lorist? What about the mage? What about, the monk? What about, the queen, the king? Like, what are all these other people who just due to their role have to be different in their world? Like, what are they doing? You don't often get that. And so I wanted to try to give you all of that in a comic. And so that is the mission, to tell this full fantasy story, giving you those different perspectives, not just an action and adventure book in a comic book, because I really do think it's possible. And I know it's been, done in a handful of ways, and we can point to some of the great books out there that, some might think would fall into that category. But as a completely independent writer, and I don't even know what you would call the work that I do when I work with the artist, I hate to say that I'm managing artists, because I'm not managing artists. That's not what I'm doing.
Yeah.
Like that's almost borderline offensive. Like, I'm not managing these artists. I'm asking and then inviting these artists to tell the story with me. And the artists that I've worked with are fantastic. And so I'm trying to bring them along in a way that keeps the story fresh for them, so they can continue to put that on the page. Because I think that the way that you can marry some of the flowery and really over the top language and fantasy with some really nice comic paneling, I think it works really, really well. And it allows me to tell more of the story than I think I would have been able to tell otherwise. And so I'm really happy with where Ennead is. I'm happy with where the writing process is for me. I think the last 2 months have been some of my best writing months. Not from a word count perspective, although it might be that too, but just from you talked about this before. Like you're always on a journey as a writer, discovering the writer you're going to be. And I really feel like I'm starting to see the writer that I'm going to be. If you pause right there, we were talking about existing in this world. So that is Jolin Lovett. He is he's a bard in my world. And whenever I am in the world of the Rule of 9, in Amashik, and I do this with my newsletter, sometimes I'm writing in his voice. And he is, he's your bard. And this is the first time we see him. This is in book 10. This is just a look ahead. He's but he's a flawed character. What he knows is one thing. What he shares with you is another. But he is the mouthpiece. When it's not me, it's him giving you the story. And so I wanted to give him a shout out. You can scroll down a little more, and you don't know what he's singing about, but you can see Anatu kind of cutting his eyes out. I'm like, man, if you don't, because there's a bit of fun I'm having there. I wanted Luke to portray him as like this. It may be a rock star, but definitely not like an A-lister rock star.
Right.
Somebody who, when he shows up, you know who he is, but you're not necessarily excited that he's there. But he does have connections. He does know things, but he is an entertainer. And so I wanted to take advantage of that character. And again, I wouldn't have been able to really do that. I could have done it in a fantasy setting. Again, I go back to Brandon Sanderson. Brandon Sanderson does that with his character Wit. Or I won't say Wit's other name, if depending on how you enter that universe, that might throw you off. But he does that with Wit, right? Wit pops up and has his own little moments here and there.
We love bards.
Yeah, and right, like so I needed that, right? Because again, we just love bars. Like I don't need to explain it to you, but like some people are like,
definitely.
why do you?
Dude,
do
as
that?
soon as
like,
I saw the bard,
bard.
my D&D brain said, "Hey, there's the bard."
Yeah, it's like I don't know, he was there. Like I went to a tavern and he was there.
That's that logic that we have, as gamers, as role players. You sit there and you go, "Oh, look, there's the bard."
Yeah,
you don't think anything else of it.
It's just like, I only have one right now, but I'm currently playing a tiefling, so like I could have like had my little tiefling horns. Like I don't know, that's just how we think. Like
exactly.
It's why when I wanted to introduce Anatu, he had to fight somebody in a tavern. Like I don't know, he just had to do that.
Makes sense to me.
Just had to
everything happens in the tavern.
Just had to do it. I don't know. Nothing else had happened in the tavern, so Anatu had to go to a tavern.
In the green room, you were talking about the T-shirt you're wearing there, and the fact that it's now available because you reached 50 backers.
Yes, and so I'm excited about this. Every campaign going forward, I'm going to try and introduce a new T-shirt. It's something that I tend to wear. I have a handful of shirts that I wear to the cons that I go to, and there are folks who, again, who've been grateful. I'm grateful to have folks like this who've been reading Ennead for a long time, and they want to show it off. They're happy, they're proud. They talk to their friends about it.
That's a good sign.
They wanted some merchandise, so it's like, all right, yeah, cool, let's do it, let's make it happen. The fact of the matter is, again, like I would love to turn a profit. I would love to make this, the primary, financial avenue of my life. Yeah, like exactly. I would love that. Like, but that's not just going to come from printing, 75 issues of a comic and then selling 100, PDFs of a comic every 4 months. Like, that's just not going to happen. So while yes, I kind of waited for people to start asking for it, I was anxious to get this part of the business, going, because I think that this is one of those ways that folks like myself, in those in between Kickstarter moments can stay afloat. But I really do. This is one of my favorite shirts. This is one of my favorite. That scene is from issue 1. And King Julius, I mentioned this before, is lecturing his sons. King Julius is big on legacy. And if I can, I'll take a step back further and explain the rule of 9 in an elevator version. The rule of 9 states that every 3 generations, the Ennead must disband and give power back to the people. But it also says that for 3 generations, 9 families will rule over the Republic Kingdom of Athea, with one holding essential veto power, that being the king and the queen. And so Queen Athenia Shadoon was chosen by the initial group of 9 families that came together to put this rebellion together. They were the ones who financed the rebellion. They were the ones who got the people together, and they chose Athenia. And so Athenia's lineage fell from her to Alaria's mother, who I actually don't think I've given her name, so I'll save that because that matters. And then to Alaria. And when Alaria, we meet her, she is pretty much standing in between like the hardest of hard places and the biggest rock possible, because she is George Washington. Does she give up power? Does she give up the presidency? Does she set the precedent for what will eventually become these presidential term limits by honoring the philosophical kind of air behind the rule of nine? Or does she say, you know what, I'm just going to rule and I'm going to pass power on to my sons? And so that's one of the things that she's battling. That's the story, and those are the decisions that she'll ultimately have to make. Does she give up power and stay true to the rule of nine, or does she somehow find a way to justify holding on to it? Because were she to die without stepping down first, there's no guarantee that that things will go the way they're supposed to. So Julius, who is her husband, but doesn't necessarily, the power doesn't really flow through him. He's in his position because of the military prowess he had, and that's why he was able to win her hand in marriage, because he earned his way to that seat. But he will only be defined by the legacy he creates. So as he's lecturing his sons on creating legacy, he's showing you that he certainly believes that what conquers is right, because as he's talking to his sons about how they will make their way in the world, he's literally shoving swords through people's necks. And so it's one of those. So this shirt was one that I always had envisioned, because I just, as he's stabbing a defenseless, this man's legs have been broken. Julius already trampled him with the horse. He could have just left them there to die, but as he's explaining to his sons that it won't be my actions, it won't be your mother's actions that define your legacy, it'll only be yours. And he says those words as he's thrusting the sword through the back of the man's throat.
Makes a point.
Exactly. And so I knew that I wanted this shirt, so I was like, well, I'm gonna make a few and see what happens. But yeah, that again, like I genuinely spend so much time with these characters and in this world. So like, you asked me a question about a t-shirt, and of course there's a story.
Of course. That's how it is. That's how it's supposed to be, because you're creating a universe, you're creating the lore, you're creating the world. And we've been joking about role-playing games and such, but that's what we love about the role-playing games, that you're thrown into this immersive world that you're becoming a part of. And I feel like that's what you've actually been able to capture that with your book.
Thank you. That's definitely, my guys and I, we play every 2 weeks when we're on a roll. Obviously, I think all of us are married at this point, so that throws a wrench in there sometimes. But
it does.
but we play pretty regularly, and that is another way that I can kind of flex this muscle and just train the storytelling. And I think a really unique way. And anybody who's played a campaign in D&D knows this. Like, you have to go there. Yeah. And when you're not willing to go there and be in that character's space, the game gets stale fast. One of the things that's happening there for me, my tiefling, his name is Morik here. He found out the day he's supposed to die. Ooh. And so as a chaotic neutral, he kind of went off the deep end for a little while, because he didn't really have that guiding light. He was willing to do whatever anyway, and so I kind of just went on probably a 2 or 3 session rampage where I wasn't running around slaughtering innocents, but when we were getting into combat, I was just I was going feral, because I knew I wasn't going to die, or at least more.
It changes what you do, yeah.
And it just changed. But we just had we just had one of our players, their character died in one of our conflicts. And that kind of snapped him back because our moral compass actually just died 2 sessions ago. So we're like,
that's not good.
Wait a minute, maybe we were being too reckless, And so, but Morikir felt that, and again, because he's not this lawless individual, but he's also not super righteous. But that was his friend.
Yeah. And
so he kind of snapped him back to life. So now the next session, I'll be going back into it with more reserved and a version of Morikir that's not willing to bite people's heads off, because I've been doing that. So yeah, it's
it's funny that you mentioned that, because I always talk when I'm talking about writing, I always bring in D&D, because I found it a great playground, a great tool to help me establish my writing style, help me establish writing in a certain way, because one of the things you do is you create your character, which is usually a good way to start. So you create your own character and you're playing in somebody else's sandbox. Then as a DM, you start to play in somebody else's sandbox with whatever world they have. Then as you grow as a DM, then you start to play in your world with the rules of somebody else. And then it starts to blossom, and it's also a good way to get to where you are as a writer, because it showcases each step of writing and how it gets bigger and bigger and bigger.
And I think it's, again, one of the reasons why, when you're saying that, I understand why fantasy fans do get so, and I think most genres have this. There's a particular type of passion that comes with like superhero fans and fantasy fans, and I think it's because we can do that. We can sit down every 2 weeks and we can do this in a small little pocket of our own little universe. Like, we can be in a world, we can embody a character, and we can make decisions in that driver's seat. And again, but when you're doing, depending on what level you're doing that at, you have a certain level of control. And so I think it's one of the reasons why people are so quick to bash a writer's decision. Again, I'm not trying to say that all writing is perfect, because it isn't, and not all writing is good. But it is all hard. All of it is difficult, right? All of it is tough to take these ideas and not only make them make sense in your head, but make them interesting to someone else who happens across them. Like the characters on the screen right now, that's Anatu, and once again, Theorosa is making an appearance because he doesn't usually go too far without it, because it is, again, this thing that he earned over years of military service to the country that he loved, and it represents who he is, despite the fact that no one knows what it is. So that's one of the things that I do play with. Everybody thinks it's a thresher. Everybody thinks it's a farming tool, and they're like, it's a weird tool, dude. Like, all right, cool. Like, it looks a little too gnarly for that, but no one really knows what that is here, because no one really does what they do. Thank you. And so he kind of gets a pass carrying it around. The first dude who sees it tells him to check it, mostly because he sees that Anatu also typically carries a dagger at his waist, but so he knew he was armed. But most people walking by don't know what that is. They don't know what he's capable of, and so
for all they know, it could be a walking stick.
Exactly. So, like, in this scene in particular, like Frib, who's the character with him, he's your prototypical kind of farm hand, and I wanted Anatu to meet Frib because the boy on the farm is one of those stories that we tell. And Frib is someone I could have told this story from his perspective, right? Does Frib ever leave this farm? Why is Frib on this farm? Like, does he have dreams and aspirations? Like, does he want to be a hero? Like, I could have done that. And so I wanted the farm boy in there. And he's really a little older than a boy. He's a man, but I wanted to play with that idea. And shout out to my friend AJ, who actually was the face for Frib. Despite the fact that Frib is a questionable guy with questionable loyalties, to say the least. But one of the things that, if you scroll down just a hair more, you can see that last panel, and you can see what Frib is saying. He refers to the fact that the first is going, they're going to war, and basically Anatu also doesn't know his way around, so he kind of knows a little bit about Athea, but he chose Athea for a reason, so he's not too steeped in their culture. And he's like, the first, what you're referring to, and then I give you a little bit of kind of. This is one of the first times that I felt like I was being a bit on the nose with what I wanted to say.
Right.
But I felt like I had been patient enough. This is like page 3 of book 2. So this is like 35 pages into the story. I wanted to just give you this. Like, here's Frib, who is thankful to Lord Cunningham that he doesn't have to go off to war.
Right.
And again, like, that's why he's there, and that's why he's going to be loyal to Lord Cunningham no matter what. And I just plant that there. And at the moment, it doesn't really mean anything. But then by the time you get to the end of the issue, you're like, oh,
I get it.
Yeah, I get it. All right, cool. Again, like, everybody's the hero of their own story, right?
Exactly.
And so I won't tell you what Frib does or doesn't do, but if you keep scrolling, I think you see how Anatu feels about it. I'm pretty sure I share that. that might have something to do with Frib. I don't know. Maybe Frib did some things.
That's a good fight.
yeah, yeah. So keep going. You'll get to see how Natsu wasn't very happy on his return back from wherever Frib dropped him off, and he has a word with Frib. And so Frib is. But Natsu's a gentleman. He does say "excuse me" to the lady.
Look like he's busting down his lovemaking.
And that also too, like one of the things, and again, I don't. This story is certainly for mature readers, but one of the things that I didn't want to introduce was too many sexual themes too early, because I wanted to, like, of course, people in this story will hope it lasts long enough for them to fall in love, for them to have relations and things like that. But in that moment, I wanted to play with that idea. Like, again, Frib thinks he's the hero. He went and did something, and then he went back home and tried to get laid, because he's proud of what he was doing.
Exactly.
And but again, everyone's the hero of their own story, so I won't spoil what he does. But that was one of the things that I wanted to play with, because that is, again, a natural thing that you would see in this fantasy setting. You conquer, and then you go and you try to find a bedmate, and that's what Frib did. And Natsu, though, didn't really feel too keen on letting that go down.
Oh man. Well, I can see we're at the 1 hour and 30 mark, actually. I can tell we've been enjoying the conversation. So, to wrap it up, let them know where they can find you. Let them know all the good stuff so they can actually help you out with this Kickstarter. I put the Kickstarter in the comments section below. So, you guys can take the link from there. But go ahead, Joe.
So, Ennead the Rule of 9, if you type that into your search bar, you'll get to the website. The website will just be that standard landing page. It'll take you anywhere you need to go. But if you're on the socials, Ennead _ the Rule of 9, that'll come up on Twitter. It'll come up on Instagram. If you go into Kickstarter, they just recently improved their search function. So if you start typing Ennead the Rule of 9 on Kickstarter, one of my 6 campaigns will come up.
Dude,
and you'll be able
I
to
didn't
find
even I didn't even get that far. I put ENN and all your things popped up.
Yeah, good. That's how we like it. I've got friends who taught me the power of SEO. So you see me use it a lot. So yeah, that's where I'm at. I'm technically on Facebook, but I feel like I've been off Facebook so long, I literally don't know how to use Facebook. Like, I have to be taught how to use Facebook again. So I'm on there too, but same thing, it'll come up. But Kickstarter, Instagram, those are the easiest places to go. If you are someone who uses Substack and you type in Ennead the Rule of 9 over on Substack, it'll come up there. If you were interested in any of the lore bits, any of the history bits, any of the extra stuff, the commentary, I do all of that in written form on Substack. So I just put up a free post. That's Orly is fantastic. She's been with me for a while.
I was gonna say, I see you got a fan over here.
She definitely she designed these.
She designed these. Oh, good work.
She did the 3D design for these. So shout out to
Good job. Good job.
We were just chatting about The Witcher before I came on here. So that's one of the great things about Kickstarter is that, like, I've genuinely met people through this who I am now friends with, who I now speak to on a regular basis, whether it's online or not. Like, that's one of the really cool things. So if I do ever get to the point where 250,000 people are reading this thing, I'll know 300 of them, and that's really cool.
At least, yeah.
At least, right? So that's really cool. So yeah, that's where you can find me. And again, I'm just as long-winded anywhere that I go. So if you're into that kind of thing.
No, we had a blast here having you on. We'll have you on again because I loved all the conversations on the writing process itself, the conversations on the world building process. Dude, it felt like a really nice writing episode.
I'm glad, and I know we've been trying to do this for a while, so I'm glad we
definitely
got to make it happen. Hopefully, the gap in between this and the next is shorter than when we met and then actually did this.
That's true. That is true.
So we'll make that the mission. I'll be at Garden State Comic Fest in 2 weeks too. So if you're
I'll
out
be there too.
I see that.
Well, there you go. That was short. Check them out at Garden State Comic Fest, because we're all going to Garden State Comic Fest. We're all going to be there. It's going to be a lot of fun. Garden State Comic Fest is one of the best conventions in the tri-state area. You guys really have to check it out. It is, if you like comics, if you like fantasy, you like all that geeky stuff, it's one of those good places to go.
If you want one of these, you can come see me. I'll have them.
There's another reason to go for Garden State Comic Fest.
Thank you.
All right. Mystic Despair, of course, she said hi. I want to make sure to say that. And of course, our friend here jumped in early on to say hi, but we were so much into the process of talking that we didn't have a chance to put it up.
Appreciate it. That's a good thing. That's a good thing.
That's a really good thing. All right, guys. What do you guys to say before we go?
Gear the Rabbit calendar, because that's the one that you forgot.
Well, did you put it over here?
You didn't forget. No, I didn't put it over, but
I didn't forget it. But I didn't put it up.
I'll at least mention what it is.
Okay.
Gear the Rabbit Bunny calendar by Isekai Production Studios.
That's the Kickstarter.
We already covered the trash pins.
Mm-hmm.
Hocus Hocus in like 2 weeks. That other guy from Source Point.
The other guy from Source Point.
I can't think of his name right now, and I feel bad.
Hendrick?
The one who's been running that Kickstarter for like a week and a half now. That dirt
Kickstarter.
Whatever. Shut up.
Oh my God, you're the Source Point guy, and you forgot.
No, it's
Can I play the Jeopardy music?
It's late. It's late.
What is the rascal does not dream of a bunny girl?
Yeah, no.
Oh my God, you guys are hilarious. Well, you're thinking that I'll pop this up because I know we mentioned him while we were talking, and he has been on the show before. Let's see. Stop that screen. Start this screen. You know, we love the Everborn saga.
Absolutely.
Our pal Steven, Everborn saga. Amazing. You guys got to check it out. And of course, he has a video game too.
Okay.
We were, so he actually is developing this himself. Steven's phenomenal. He's Everborn spans multiple mediums. It's fantastic. He's got
he does a great job.
3 main stories that are already out. We were just on the phone last week, and so some of the things that he's working on are really exciting.
Oh yeah, I love talking to him, and I think we're trying to get him back on the show. We'll see when it works out.
Yeah, maybe he and I can coordinate. Funny, and again, we could keep going forever. But so I was at New York Comic Con, not this year, but the year prior, and I signed up to share a table with my friend Honor Vincent. Shout out to Honor, who's another writer who's got New Rat City out right now, Scout Comics, and we shared a table, and I roll up the first day. And so Honor's on my left, but I knew that. And wouldn't you know, Steven is on my right. No plans, no nothing. And so it's like this is really cool.
That's why I love Comic-Con.
That was a fun experience because I had never met him in person. That was the first time I met him in person. And so it was really cool to have the individual who kind of again took me under their wing to say like these are the X's and O's of executing your comic. Be there. So if you do get them on, if you let me know, maybe I can sneak on.
I'll hit you up when I talk to him again about being on. I'll hit you both up. Maybe we can have you both on and have some fun.
Absolutely.
So I did remember now.
I figured we'd give you enough time.
Sean Daly. Illumin.
How could you forget Sean?
Well, I mean, I know we talked about it on Monday, but like,
Sean is nice people, man.
Sean liked one of my tweets today. I feel bad now.
Ralph, help me out here. How do you pronounce the name of that Illumon?
Is that the two? It's the two siblings, right? I think that's how you pronounce it.
Yeah,
that's how I've been saying.
Okay, that's what I thought to say. Isn't that how it is?
Yes, it's a sibling story.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel bad now that I couldn't think of that either. So I thought I was.
So see, Chunky, you don't have to worry about it.
Yeah, we're on the same boat.
And then, last but not least, of course, March 25th, 26th, Anna Marathon, Bowling Green, Ohio. Come visit me. Come hang out with people. It'll be a good time. I'm running a panel. It's about that name right there.
Chunky Kong.
Come find out about what truly happened with the Epstein suicide.
Oh my God.
And all sorts of various miscellaneous things. It'll be fun. So
Chunky Kong was involved in the Waffle House incident.
I was.
Well, that's why she did such a great move, because she was prepared.
Yeah. So that's all I got now.
All right, Nat, go ahead, do your thing.
All right. I promised Jordan this, so.
Uh-oh.
Yep.
Excuse me? One singular guardian has been kicking your race's collective rears for 9 years.
Oh,
They
here we go.
killed deities for fun and turned them into guns for a meme.
Ugh.
They commit genocide on entire races for loot. They assassinated your last leader and cleaned out your daddy's ship while he wrote fan fiction about them,
Oh my
and
God.
promptly left to let you pick up the pieces.
I knew this was coming.
The only reason why they aren't here is because they casually began wielding the darkness to clap rears in new ways. All I have to do is make them end you and tell them that you have a fancy new gun, or that errors can make you into one. So think about that before you tell us to bow down to your sorry behind.
I think I caught like 4 different iterations of "but" in that. Is that correct?
Just a little bit.
I think I got 4. Did I
Oh,
miss one?
there's one other. Well,
There
yes.
was another one. All right.
Fluke Schmallow.
Oh, so now that you talked about all that, Nat, who's this young lady over here?
That is.
Oh,
Fluke.
that I have no clue. Never seen this artwork before.
You mean you've
If I
never
had to
seen this
go off of
amazing
my
artwork?
tagging and experience inside the Borus, I think that's probably Flushmallow. From what people tell me, she's a really nice person and like she does really good art. But I don't know who that is, man.
And now she's hanging out with people that eat croissants and.
Yes, our lovely little Flushmallow has spread her wings and flew all the way to France. But you guys can check her out on her Instagram with her beautiful, amazing art. And of course, remember that she just finished doing that beautiful pin set with Bitsy Tandem, who has another pin set going on, as you saw at the beginning of the show.
Yep.
And there you have it, folks. That is all our things for today. The special Friday the 13th episode. Of course, we loved it, so we're going to have our friend back on over here.
Actually, there is one other thing I
You
forgot.
saw something?
There's one thing I did forget. If you like these things, and I know not a lot of people do.
Uh-oh.
What are those? I don't know what that is, man. It looks like you're just holding a pile of garbage.
I know. But if you're one of the people that do like them, Garrett Gunn is something in the works.
Of course he does.
Good boy. And there
That'd be a cute little thing.
may or may not be a Flint Sparks Funko in the works. Well,
Sounds good.
he's pretty much made it clear, so there is.
I want a good boy Funko.
I do too.
So you want Funko? You choose is the way to go. They're better.
No,
but then
you want a
but
figure.
then they give them all the happy.
If we're going to talk about this, guys, we're going to talk about this, right? If you actually want a figure, what you need to do is talk to Shadow Rabbit, because Shadow Rabbit does amazing figures. And he can actually make you your own Funko. You can commission him to do that. And it'll look better
we don't want Funkos, Ralph. We don't want Funkos.
No, I just said it'll look way better than the Funkos. It'll be
Exactly,
your
but they're not Funkos. They're better
figure.
than Funkos.
Your own figure, because Shadow does amazing work. He puts all these things together, and of course, Shadow Rabbit just does beautiful work. He is an amazing creative artist. Look at him put all these beautiful things together. So go commission Shadow Rabbit, and he'll make your dreams come to life instead of getting a Funko.
This is
Shadow Rabbit is the man.
Since we're talking about figures, one of the things that I will certainly be doing in the not too distant future is coming out with a few myself. I had this commissioned before I had the Eurosis commissioned. This is Niawi of the Order of the Jade Crest.
That looks beautiful.
She is one of the 5 in universe elves of mine, and I plan on. I don't know that I'm bold enough to do a pure figure Kickstarter, like minifig Kickstarter, but this is obviously not a minifig. She comes to me, comes with me to all my shows now. But
that looks like a centerpiece, not a minifigure.
Yeah, so that's a one of one. But I am thinking about transitioning into some minifigures and even some like 8 to 11 inch kind of collectible pieces. To introduce to fans and readers of Ennead. So, since we're talking about figures, we just figured I'd drop that too.
There you go. There you go, folks. Now we've talked a lot of geek stuff today, and I'll do what I always do here. I'll press the button, and where it stops,